The prison yard was unlike anything Mike Tyson had ever experienced, and he'd been through hell before. But this was a special kind of hell. Concrete walls stretching toward the sky, barbed wire coiled thick along the top, guards watching from towers with rifles ready, and everywhere you looked, men who had nothing left to lose. The yard was crowded that afternoon, inmates scattered in groups, some lifting weights, others playing cards, most just standing with that prison stare, eyes that had seen too much, done too much, survived too much. Mike walked onto the yard for the first time, and every single person stopped what they were doing to look at him, not because they were fans, not because they respected him, but because everyone in that place knew who Mike Tyson was, the former heavyweight champion of the world, the baddest man on the planet, now just another inmate in an Indiana state prison. And for some of those guys that made him a target. He was wearing standard-issue prison blues. Nothing special, nothing that set him apart except the fact that he was Mike Tyson. He kept his head down, not out of fear, but out of awareness. He'd learned early in life how to read a room, how to feel the energy, how to know when something was about to go wrong. And right now the energy in that yard was thick, tense, waiting for something to happen. Mike had been in prison for a few weeks already, kept mostly in isolation during intake and processing. But now he was in the general population. This was for real. This was where he'd have to live, survive, figure out how to get through a 6-year sentence without losing his mind or getting killed. And the thing about prison, it doesn't matter who you were on the outside. In here you had to prove yourself all over again. He found a spot near the wall, away from the main groups, just watching, trying to get a sense of the hierarchy, the power dynamics, who ran what, who to avoid, who to watch out for. But he wasn't alone for long. Within minutes he felt it, that sensation of when someone is watching you, not just looking, but studying you, measuring you, deciding what they're going to do about you. Mike looked up and saw him. A tall guy, maybe 6'5", built like he'd been lifting weights since he was a teenager, arms covered in tattoos, face hard and scarred from fights that probably started long before prison. He was surrounded by 4 other guys, all looking in Mike's direction, all clearly part of whatever gang this big man ran. And the way they looked at Mike wasn't curiosity, it was a challenge. The big man started walking toward Mike, slow, deliberate, his crew following like shadows. Other inmates noticed and started moving out of the way, creating space because everyone in that yard knew what was about to happen. This was a test. This was the moment where Mike Tyson was either going to establish himself or get eaten alive. Mike stood up slowly, didn't make any sudden moves, didn't show aggression, but didn't show fear either. He just stood there, calm, waiting. The big man stopped about 5 feet away, arms crossed over his chest, looking down at Mike with a smile that had no kindness in it. "So you're Mike Tyson," he said, his voice loud enough for everyone nearby to hear. "The big bad champion. I heard a lot about you, man. Heard you used to knock people out in seconds. Used to be the scariest man alive." He paused, let that hang in the air, and then his smile grew wider. "But you ain't nothing in here. In here I run this place. You understand me? I run this yard. I run the blocks. I run it all. And if you want to survive, you're gonna have to respect that." The yard went silent. Everyone was watching now, inmates moving closer, forming a circle, sensing the drama, the violence, the entertainment. The guards in the towers noticed, but they didn't move yet, just watched, waiting to see if they'd need to intervene. This was prison politics, and unless someone got seriously hurt, they usually let things play out. Mike looked at the big man, really looked at him, and something inside Mike shifted. He'd been in situations like this his whole life. Brownsville, the streets, foster homes, juvenile detention centers. There was always someone bigger, someone tougher, someone trying to prove they were the alpha. And Mike had learned early on that how you respond in these moments defines everything that comes after. But here's the thing most people didn't understand about Mike Tyson at that point in his life. He wasn't that angry kid from Brooklyn anymore. He wasn't even the same reckless champion who dominated the boxing world. Prison had already started to change him, forcing him to think differently, to question who he was and who he wanted to be. Cus D'Amato, his trainer and father figure, had died years before, but his voice was still in Mike's head, teaching him even now. Cus used to say, "Mike, violence is easy. Any fool can throw a punch. But knowing when not to throw a punch, that's wisdom. That's real power." And standing in that prison yard looking up at a 6'5" gang leader who was trying to humiliate him in front of everyone, Mike had a choice to make. He could do what everyone expected, what the old Mike would have done, and end it in seconds with his fists. Or he could do something different. Mike took a breath and spoke, his voice low and calm, not challenging, not backing down, just matter of fact. I hear you, man. I'm not here to run anything. I'm not here to take your spot or challenge you, or any of that. I'm just trying to do my time and get out. He paused, let that sink in, and added, but I need you to understand something too. I respect you. I respect what you got going here, but I ain't gonna be disrespected. Not by you, not by nobody. The big man's smile faded. He hadn't expected that. He'd expected Mike to either fight or fold, to either challenge him or submit to him. But Mike didn't do either. He acknowledged the man's power without giving up his own dignity, and that threw everything off balance. You think you can just walk in here and set terms? The big man said, his voice harder now, aggressive. You think because you were somebody on the outside you get special treatment in here? He stepped closer, invading Mike's space, trying to force a reaction. I could break you right now, Tyson, right here in front of everybody. Show everyone you ain't nothing. Mike didn't move, didn't blink, just stood there, and when he spoke again, his voice was even lower than before, but somehow it carried weight, authority, something that made everyone lean in to hear. You could try, Mike said, and maybe you'd win, maybe you wouldn't, but either way, what does that prove? That you can fight? Everyone in this yard can fight. That's why we're all here. The real question is, what happens after? Because if you come at me, I gotta come at you, and then your crew comes at me, and then it escalates, and then the guards get involved, and then we both end up in the hole for months, losing privileges, losing time, making everything harder. Is that really what you want? The yard was dead quiet now. Nobody saw this coming. They expected Mike Tyson to explode, to show that legendary fury, that knockout power, but instead he was talking, reasoning, playing chess while everyone else was playing checkers. And the crazy thing, it was working. The big man hesitated. You could see it on his face, the internal calculation, the realization that Mike wasn't going to give him the fight he wanted, at least not the way he wanted it. And without that fight, without Mike backing down or swinging first, the big man didn't have a clean win. If he attacked Mike now, after Mike had basically offered peace, he'd look like the aggressor, the bully, and in prison, reputation is everything. But wait, because this is where the story gets even more intense. One of the guys in the big man's crew, a shorter, stockier inmate with a shaved head and cold eyes, stepped forward. Man, forget this talk. He's playing you, Marcus. Let me handle this. And before anyone could react, he lunged at Mike, his fist cocked back, ready for a sucker punch. 5 minutes. That's how much time had passed since Mike first walked onto that yard, since Marcus approached him, since this whole situation started building. And in those 5 minutes, Mike had tried diplomacy, he'd tried reason, he'd tried de-escalation, but now, in a fraction of a second, all that went out the window. Mike's instincts took over. 20 years of training, thousands of hours in the ring, reflexes that had been burned into his muscle memory so deep they were automatic. He slipped the punch, barely moving his head, and countered with a short, compact hook to the man's ribs. It wasn't flashy, it wasn't dramatic, but it was precise, technical, and devastatingly effective. The man went down, gasping for air, clutching his side. The yard erupted. Inmates started shouting, some moving in, some moving away. Guards in the towers were yelling orders. Alarms started blaring, but Mike didn't follow up, didn't keep hitting, didn't lose control. He just stood there looking down at the guy on the ground, and then back at Marcus. I didn't want this, Mike said, and his voice sounded tired, almost sad. I gave you respect, I gave you a way out, and this is what happens. He looked around at the crowd, at all the faces watching him, judging him, deciding what this moment meant. I'm not here to be your enemy, but I'm not gonna be your victim either. Marcus stared at Mike for a long moment, his crew looking at him, waiting for orders, waiting to see if this was going to turn into a full-blown riot. And then slowly, Marcus nodded, not a friendly nod, not a sign of submission, but an acknowledgement, respect, maybe, or at least an understanding. All right, Tyson, Marcus said quietly, loud enough only for Mike to hear. You made your point. He gestured to his crew, and they picked up the guy who'd lunged at Mike, helping him up and leading him away. The crowd started to disperse. The excitement was over. The moment had passed. Guards rushed onto the yard, grabbed Mike and put him in handcuffs. Standard procedure after any physical altercation. They'd take him to the hole, question him, figure out what happened, decide on punishment. But as they led him away, Mike looked back at the yard one last time, and he saw something that surprised him. Respect. Not from everyone, but from enough people that it mattered. He'd been tested, and he'd passed, not by being the most violent, but by being the most in control. Later that night, sitting in a cell in the hole, Mike thought about what had happened. He'd tried to avoid the fight, tried to use words instead of fists, tried to be the person Kaz had taught him to be. But in the end, violence found him anyway, forced his hand, made him react, and the question that kept looping in his mind was, could he have handled it differently? Should he have? The truth was, Mike didn't know. Prison was complicated, surviving was complicated, and being Mike Tyson made everything even more complicated. People expected him to be a monster, to live up to the reputation, to be the baddest man on the planet, and when he tried to be something else, tried to show restraint, wisdom, growth, it confused people, set them off, made them test him even harder. But here's what Mike learned in that moment, in those 5 minutes that changed everything. Strength isn't just about what you can do to someone else. It's about what you can control in yourself. The old Mike, the angry kid from Brooklyn, the out-of-control champion, he would have knocked out Marcus and his whole crew, would have sent a message that nobody could touch him. But the Mike who sat in that isolation cell, thinking about Cuss, thinking about his future, thinking about who he wanted to be when he got out, that Mike knew that violence wasn't the answer, or at least it wasn't the only answer. Days later, when Mike was released back into the general population, something had changed. Other inmates looked at him differently, treated him differently, not exactly with fear, but with respect. They'd seen that he could hold his own, that he wasn't soft, but they'd also seen that he wasn't reckless, that he tried to avoid conflict when possible. And in prison, that combination, strength with restraint, was rare and valuable. Marcus approached Mike one afternoon on the yard. No crew this time, just the two of them. "I thought about what you said," Marcus told him, "about what happens after. You were right. Fighting you wouldn't have done nothing but make life harder for both of us." He paused and reached out his hand. "We're good." Mike looked at the hand, then at Marcus's face, trying to read him, trying to decide if it was genuine or another test. And then he shook it. "We're good," Mike said. And that was it. No big speeches, no dramatic reconciliation, just two men in a bad situation choosing not to make it worse. But the impact of that moment rippled through the prison, changed the dynamics, created a kind of peace that hadn't existed before. And Mike, he realized something deep. The reporter who called him a street thug was wrong. The people who saw him as just a fighter, just a violent man with no depth, were wrong. Mike Tyson was more than his worst moments, more than his mistakes, more than the image the world had created of him. He was a survivor, a thinker, someone capable of growth and change and wisdom. Prison was supposed to break him, to punish him, to make him regret his choices. And in some ways it did, but it also gave him something unexpected: time to think, space to grow, a perspective he never would have gained if he'd stayed on top of the world, undefeated, unchallenged, unchanged. Those 5 minutes on the yard weren't just about avoiding a fight or establishing dominance. They were about Mike choosing who he wanted to be, not just in prison but in life, and the choice he made to try peace first, to use his brain before his fists, to show strength through restraint. That choice defined him more than any knockout ever could. So when you hear about Mike Tyson's prison years, when you read the headlines about the fallen champion behind bars, remember this: the real story wasn't about what Mike lost, it was about what he found. He found wisdom in a place designed to crush hope. He found strength in vulnerability. He found respect through restraint. And he found himself the real Mike Tyson. Not the image, not the reputation, but the human being underneath all the noise. 5 minutes, that's all it took to change everything. To set a course for the rest of his time in prison. To plant seeds of growth that would bloom years later when he walked out and started rebuilding his life. 5 minutes of choosing words over fists, strategy over violence, wisdom over rage. And in those 5 minutes, Mike Tyson proved something nobody expected. The baddest man on the planet was also one of the wisest.